The Pacific stretched in every direction, an endless pane of steel blue water flecked with sunlight. Above it all, the USS Leviathan moved like a floating city, its flight deck alive with motion. Jets shrieked into the sky, their afterburners turning the morning air into a rippling mirage. Sailors in color-coded jerseys signaled, sprinted, and ducked as machinery roared around them. Far below the flight deck, inside the dimly lit Combat Information Center, Astria Nix sat at an isolated workstation. The CIC hummed with a low thrum of electronics, and the clipped voices of operators feeding data into the Leviathan's command systems. Most wore Navy uniforms. She did not. Her clothes were simple, dark slacks, a fitted shirt with rolled sleeves, but one thing drew the eye, a silver badge hanging from a slender chain around her neck. No rank insignia, no name tag. Just a polished plate etched with lines so fine they shimmered in the light. Anyone who knew technology might have guessed at its quantum encryption markers. Few aboard did. She had been on the Leviathan for 21 days, and in that time had spoken less than some sailors managed before breakfast. To most of the crew, she was a curiosity at best, an intruder at worst. She had the run of certain systems even senior officers couldn't access, yet she had never bragged, never explained. Quiet competence had a way of making people uncomfortable. At her terminal, lines of shifting code scrolled across 3 separate screens. Her eyes moved quickly, scanning for patterns the way a trained musician might listen for a wrong note in a symphony. Something was wrong. It wasn't obvious, not the sort of breach that would trip standard alarms. This was quieter, like a hairline crack in a dam. A fragment of code repeating where it shouldn't, buried deep inside the Leviathan's cyber defense architecture. Most would have dismissed it as noise. Astria knew better. She leaned forward, fingers flying over the holographic keyboard. A shadow fell across her station. "Running another one of your special diagnostics, Nix?" Chief Petty Officer Wayland asked. His voice dipped in the kind of sarcasm that carried well in a quiet room. Astria didn't look up. "That's correct, Chief." Wayland set a coffee mug on the edge of her console and crossed his arms. 3 weeks you've been here. 3 weeks with your mysterious clearance and that shiny little badge. And what do we have to show for it? He didn't wait for her to answer. "Nothing anyone can see." "Chief," she said evenly, "there's an irregularity in the quantum firewall. I need to finish this scan." He snorted. "Quantum firewall? Listen to yourself. No wonder the Admiral calls you dead weight." The comment drew a few chuckles from nearby operators, though they quickly bent back to their own screens when Astria glanced their way. Her eyes, cool, sharp, and far too assessing for their comfort, made them remember they had work to do. Then, without warning, her screens went dark. Access terminated. Security Protocol 7 Alpha engaged. The message glowed crimson across every display. Astria's jaw tightened. A voice crackled over the CIC comm system. "Specialist Nix to the bridge." Immediately, every conversation in the room died. Operators pretended to focus on their tasks, but heads turned as she stood, sliding her custom tablet into a shoulder case and pressing a thumb to its biometric lock. The silver badge caught the light as she moved toward the hatch. "Looks like your ride's up," Wayland said, unable to keep the smirk off his face. She didn't answer, but her thoughts were already racing. Why now? Who triggered a 7 Alpha on my station? The irregularity she'd been tracking was still there, and now someone had cut her off before she could pinpoint it. As she stepped into the narrow, steel-gray passageway outside the CIC, voices followed her. Temp contractor finally getting shown the door. Wonder who she ticked off. Bet that badges just for show. She ignored them all, climbing the ladder well toward the bridge. The air grew warmer and brighter as she approached the surface, the faint tang of jet fuel drifting in from the open deck above. The bridge of the Leviathan was a theater of discipline, ranks of consoles, glass walls, and the ocean stretching far beyond. At the center stood Admiral Calloway Blackburn. His frame was lean but wiry, his uniform immaculate, the gold of his shoulder boards catching the morning light. His face was all angles and weathered lines, the kind of man carved more by storms than by age. He was reading from a printed report when she arrived. His eyes didn't lift immediately, but the silence in the room made it clear everyone was aware of her presence. When he finally looked at her, it was with the same expression one might reserve for a weapon that had misfired. "Specialist Nix," he said, voice like gravel. "Do you know what this is?" She glanced at the document. "No, sir. It's a security log showing unauthorized access attempts from your terminal. Attempts to override missile defense protocols." A few heads in the bridge twitched toward her. She kept her posture straight, hands clasped behind her back. "Sir," she replied evenly, "I was tracking an anomaly in our defense system. There are signs of a potential compromise. In systems you have no business accessing." His voice hardened. "You're here as temporary civilian support, not cyber command." "With respect, Admiral. I've had enough technical indicators for one lifetime." Blackburn cut her off. He turned to address the bridge crew. "This is what happens when we let civilians with mysterious credentials wander a nuclear carrier." No one moved. No one spoke. Blackburn's verdict came like a gavel strike. "Two Marines. Escort her to the flight deck. She's leaving my ship today." Astria's eyes flicked briefly to Commander Thorne, the executive officer, standing at his station with an expression too carefully neutral. She said nothing as two Marines appeared beside her, their presence sudden and absolute. She surrendered her tablet. When a Marine reached for the silver badge, Blackburn waved him off. "Let her keep her trinket. Won't work outside our systems anyway." The humiliation was deliberate. Every face on the bridge would remember it. As the Marines turned her toward the hatch, she knew one thing with certainty. Someone aboard had just made a very big mistake. The corridor outside the bridge was narrow enough that Astria's shoulder brushed the bulkhead as the Marines marched her forward. Their boots struck the deck in perfect rhythm, echoing like a drumbeat of finality. News traveled faster than she did. By the time they reached the main companionway, sailors had already begun appearing in doorways, leaning casually against frames, pretending to be on their way somewhere. Every one of them knew exactly what was happening. She kept her chin level, gaze fixed forward. To meet their eyes would be to acknowledge the whispers trailing her like smoke. "Told you she wouldn't last. Special treatment doesn't mean you're untouchable. What's that badge even for?" The Marines guided her through the ship's labyrinth of steel, past compartments humming with electronics, past storerooms where the air smelled faintly of machine oil and paint, up toward the open sky. The thrum of aircraft engines grew louder with every step. They emerged onto the flight deck in a rush of sunlight and wind. The Pacific gleamed in every direction, broken only by the outlines of the battle group beyond. F-35s sat in neat rows, their canopies glinting like molten gold. Sailors in bright jerseys scurried between them. Their work momentarily paused to watch the strange civilian being paraded to the waiting helicopter. The wind caught her hair, whipping it across her face. She didn't brush it away. Halfway across the deck, a familiar figure appeared from behind a parked aircraft, Ensign Orion. Young, clean-cut, his uniform still carrying the crispness of a man who hadn't yet learned to look worn down by the job. He had been one of the few aboard to treat her with anything approaching courtesy. The Marines slowed just enough for Orion to step closer. "Ma'am," he said quietly, barely audible over the roar of a taxiing jet. She angled her body so the Marines couldn't see her hand, and slipped something small into the inside pocket of his jacket. The faint click of metal against fabric was lost in the noise of the deck. "If the system asks for Quansil verification," she murmured, her voice pitched so only he could hear, "use this." He blinked, surprised, but his nod was quick and sure. The exchange lasted less than 3 seconds. The Marines kept her moving. From the island superstructure above, Commander Thorne watched, his face unreadable. His hands rested lightly on the railing, but his eyes tracked the interaction with the precision of a man mentally noting every detail. At the far end of the deck, the helicopter waited, rotors already spinning, each blade a blurred crescent of motion. The Marines didn't pause. They stepped her straight to the open door. One of them gestured. In. Astria placed one foot on the skid, then glanced back once, not at the Admiral, not at the watching crew, but at the vast, bristling bulk of the Leviathan herself. Her expression gave nothing away. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of hydraulic fluid and salt. The pilot gave her a brief nod, then turned his focus back to the controls. She strapped in without assistance. The Marines stepped back. One gave the door a hard slam. The noise of the outside world muted instantly, replaced by the mechanical growl of the helicopter's turbines. Through the open cockpit, she could see the deck crew clearing the area. The aircraft rose in a controlled climb, the Leviathan shrinking beneath them. Rows of parked jets became toys, the massive superstructure a dark tooth against the glittering water. Astria kept her gaze on the ship, not because she was sentimental, but because she was calculating. She ran her fingers over the edge of her silver badge, feeling the subtle ridges where the quantum encryption nodes were embedded. Blackburn had called it a trinket. He couldn't have been more wrong. She exhaled slowly, letting her mind shift gears. The neural interface in the badge warmed against her skin, awaiting her mental command. Even from here, there were threads still connecting her to the ship's network. Faint, fragile, but enough to work with. This was the contingency she had built for. Not the humiliation, that was irrelevant, but the inevitability that someone aboard would try to force her out before she found what she was looking for. The Leviathan was compromised. She had known it within the first week. She closed her eyes and began mapping the infiltration patterns she had memorized, each a ghost of hostile code buried deep inside the carrier's defenses. They were subtle enough that ordinary diagnostics would miss them entirely. The pilot's voice cut into her concentration. Pearl Harbor ETA 3 hours. She nodded, but didn't answer. Her work now was measured in minutes, not hours. The Leviathan was in more danger than anyone aboard realized. And if her calculations were correct, they didn't have 3 hours before that danger arrived in full. The helicopter climbed into a crisp blue morning, the Leviathan already shrinking to a toy-like silhouette on the steel expanse of the Pacific. The rhythmic thump of rotor blades filled the cabin, steady as a metronome. Astria sat strapped into the aft seat, eyes half closed. The motion of the aircraft nothing more than background noise. Her mind was elsewhere, deep inside a lattice of data streams, defense protocols, and encrypted channels only she could see. The neural interface in her silver badge pulsed faintly against her chest, each beat syncing with her own heartbeat. With every subtle shift of thought, she sent quiet signals through the network pathways she had embedded into the Leviathan systems over the past 3 weeks. They weren't supposed to exist. Officially, no U.S. naval vessel carried quantum-linked civilian monitoring protocols. Unofficially, Project Sentinel had been weaving them into critical assets for months. Astria had been the one sent to the Leviathan. She had suspected from day 2 that she would be removed before her work was done. That was why she had left the hooks in place. The pilot's voice crackled back over the cabin intercom. "Smooth air ahead, ma'am. Pearl in 3 hours." She gave the barest nod, not looking up. If her timeline was right, the Leviathan wouldn't last a fraction of that before things turned bad, catastrophically bad. Far below, in the Leviathan's Combat Information Center, a low, insistent tone cut through the steady background hum. It wasn't a drill tone, and it wasn't a systems check. It was the kind of alert that made experienced sailors straighten in their seats. Lieutenant Farrow called one of the radar techs. "I've got an unscheduled satellite launch from Sector 7. Trajectory matches military deployment profiles." Farrow's brow creased. "Confirm type." Before the tech could answer, Admiral Blackburn stepped into the central command ring. "What's our threat assessment?" "Sir," Farrow replied, voice tight. "Encrypted transmissions detected. Pattern matches ICBM uplink activation." Blackburn's expression hardened. "Bring Aegis systems online. Alert the battle group." "Aye, sir." The order went in, and nothing happened. "Sir," the tech stammered, "Aegis isn't responding." Blackburn's jaw flexed. "Manual override." Authorization Blackburn Delta 6. The command was entered. The system's response was immediate. Override denied. Quantial verification required. A heavy silence fell over the CIC. Chief Wayland, standing near the forward console, went pale. "That's Nix's protocol," he said slowly. "Only she had quantum authorization." Blackburn leaned over the display. "What the hell is this? We can't have defense systems locked to one civilian's access codes." Before anyone could answer, the comms officer looked up sharply. "Priority Alpha transmission from Stratcom, Admiral." The main display flickered, then resolved into the face of a four-star general. His expression darkened at once. "Admiral Blackburn," the general said, "is Specialist Astria Nix present?" "No," Blackburn replied stiffly. "She was removed due to security concerns." The general closed his eyes briefly, like a man hearing confirmation of his worst fear. "Then God help you. Specialist Nix isn't support staff. She's Director of Project Sentinel, National Security Council Directive. She was embedding fail-safes into your systems. She's the only thing standing between your carrier and a full-scale cyber breach." Blackburn felt the blood drain from his face. "What?" "She was sent because our intel predicted a hostile cyber strike against your battle group within the month. It appears that prediction was correct. Where is she now?" "En route to Pearl Harbor. 3 hours out. Beyond recall range." The general's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "Then you're on your own until she can re-establish control. And Admiral," he leaned closer, "she will know what to do. If you're lucky." Above the waves, the helicopter cut a clean arc through the sky. Astria's fingers rested lightly on her knees, but her mind was moving at full sprint. She could feel the Leviathan's defense grid flickering under the strain of an external override attempt. Whoever had built the incursion was good, precise enough to slip under routine scans, ruthless enough to disable failsafes. But she recognized the cadence of the intrusion. It matched the anomalies she'd been tracking before her lockout. Her removal from the ship wasn't an accident. It was part of the attack. The Marines who'd escorted her had thought they were carrying out Blackburn's will. In reality, they had been clearing the last obstacle for the infiltrator, someone with the authority to direct security protocols from within the Leviathan itself. Her lips moved in a whisper only she could hear. "Thorn." The thought clicked into place with cold certainty. From here, she had one advantage left. The hidden quantum links she had threaded through auxiliary systems under the guise of routine diagnostics. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get a foot back in the door, if she moved fast. She opened her eyes. "Pilot," she said, voice firm over the rotor noise. "Reduce altitude to 500 feet and maintain current bearing. And keep comms open to the Leviathan if they call." The pilot glanced back, uncertain. "Yes, ma'am." She didn't explain. There wasn't time. Back on the carrier, alarms began to wail. The first alarm was low and steady, a tone that cut through the chatter of the Combat Information Center like a blade. Those who had been speaking stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the tactical display. "Multiple inbound threats detected," Lieutenant Farrow reported, his voice tight. "Missiles, bearing 085. Impact in 15 minutes. The CIC, normally a place of crisp precision, became a compressed storm of movement. Operators bent over their consoles, voices snapping into comms headsets. The usual calm rhythm of naval operations was gone, replaced by an edge of panic. "Bring Aegis back online now," Admiral Blackburn ordered. "Sir," Farrow said, fingers flying over his console. "Defense system still not responding. Every attempt requests quant-seal verification." Blackburn's voice dropped into the growl he used when frustration threatened to break discipline. "Override the damn thing." "Sir, I can't," Farrow said without looking up. "It's hard-coded. We'd need the original authorization key." Wayland spoke from the far console, his voice stripped of its earlier mockery. "That's Nix's key, Admiral. No one else has it." Blackburn's knuckles whitened on the edge of the console. "Get me that helicopter back on comms." The comms officer cut him off. "Sir, Tango 3 isn't responding. We're being jammed." The room fell into a cold, Focus silence. Then Ensign Orion stepped forward. He moved like a man who knew the weight of what he was about to do. Sir, before she left, Specialist Nix gave me this. In his palm lay a small, encrypted drive, its casing smooth. It seems invisible until held to the light. She said it might be needed if the system asked for Quanseal verification. Blackburn didn't hesitate. Give it here. He inserted the device into the primary console. The screen went black for a heartbeat. Then code began streaming upward, faster than any human could read. The characters were strange, layered, some lines shifting as if alive. What the hell is it doing? Blackburn asked. Establishing handshake, Pharaoh murmured. This is, Admiral, this is her system talking to ours. She's still linked in. From the helicopter? From everywhere, Pharaoh said, astonished. It's using dozens of access points inside the ship, maintenance terminals, auxiliary control nodes, even the environmental controls. Orion's eyes widened. She was installing back doors the whole time she was here. That's how she's. Before he could finish, the comms tech spoke up. Sir, Marines report they've breached auxiliary control. Commander Thorne was inside, attempting to wipe drives. They've taken him into custody. The pieces locked together in Blackburn's mind with the weight of inevitability. Thorne's too careful neutrality. His quiet encouragement to move Nix off the ship. The timing of the breach. Secure him in a brig, Blackburn said. I want every encrypted file he touched preserved. The countdown clock appeared on the main display without warning. 1 minute. What is that? Blackburn barked. Pharaoh swallowed. Counter-strike protocol. It's hers. It's live. Abort it. I don't know how. No one moved. The only sound was the steady tick of the clock as it slipped past the 50-second mark. 500 feet above the ocean, the helicopter pitched slightly in the wind. Astria sat with a compact quantum field generator unfolded on her lap, cable snaking into a small satellite uplink box strapped to the seat beside her. Her hands moved in a blur over the device's control surface. The pilot glanced over his shoulder. Ma'am, I'm not sure I want to know, but what exactly are you doing? Saving your carrier, she said without looking up, and unmasking a traitor. She felt the defense grid's acknowledgement, as if the ship had spoken back to her. One by one, the back doors she'd embedded over 3 weeks lit up in her mind's interface, dormant until now, waiting for this exact moment. She pushed the command live. On the Leviathan, the countdown hit 5 seconds. The room felt suspended in a strange stillness, as though even the air was waiting. 3, 2, 1. The display flashed white. Then, slowly, new words appeared. Sentinel protocol active. The tactical map shifted, showing the inbound missiles veering off course, their guidance scrambled. Icons winked out one by one as the threats plunged harmlessly into the sea. Simultaneously, a spiderweb of new connections appeared across the battle group's network, defensive systems roaring back to life with unprecedented precision. On a secondary screen, every encrypted communication Thorne had sent in the past month began to unspool, plain text, undeniable. Blackburn stared at it all, the enormity settling over him. My God. Wayland shook his head slowly. She just saved the entire fleet. For several seconds after the words Sentinel Protocol active appeared, no one in the CIC spoke. The room was lit only by the glow of monitors, each screen showing the impossible. Threats vanishing, systems roaring back to life, data streams smoothing into perfect alignment. Then the tactical officer broke the silence. All inbound missiles have lost guidance. They're splashing down outside lethal range. A ripple of disbelief passed through the crew. The crisis that had been a noose around their necks a moment ago had simply slipped away. Blackburn's eyes stayed on the display. The network was alive in a way he'd never seen before, its connections so intricate and overlapping that it looked almost organic. She's rebuilding our defenses in real time, he murmured. Pharaoh pointed to another window. Sir, this is a complete data dump of Thorne's comm traffic for the past month. No encryption left. Every altered log, every backdoor install, it's all here. Blackburn didn't take his eyes off the screen. Patch me through to the Marines, holding him. The voice of the Marine sergeant came over comms, steady and professional. Auxiliary control secured, sir. Thorne's in custody. Put him on. There was the sound of movement, then Thorne's voice, sharp with anger. You don't know what you've just done, Admiral. She's the real threat. Her and that quantum interface. You think she's protecting you? She's building a kill switch for the entire fleet. Blackburn's jaw tightened. The difference, Commander, is that she hasn't been sending targeting data to a foreign military. You think you're safe now, Thorne snapped, but you're not. You've just given the government the power to. The sergeant cut the line. Sir, recommend we hold further discussion for his court-martial. Do it, Blackburn said. 500 feet above the Pacific, Astria's hand slowed. The neural link in her badge was warm now, almost hot, the strain of processing so many simultaneous operations pressing into the back of her skull. The defense grid status pulsed steady green in her mental overlay. The fleet was secure, for now. The pilot's voice came again, hesitant. Ma'am, whatever you just did, the carrier's signaling that the attack's been neutralized. Orders. Turn us around, she said without looking up, heading back to the Leviathan. There's still cleanup to do. The pilot nodded without question and banked the helicopter into a wide arc. On the carrier, the CIC crew was already moving into post-crisis tempo, securing systems and logging incident reports. But the mood had shifted. No one was looking at Blackburn with questions in their eyes. All eyes were on the feed from the tactical network, where Nix's work was still rewriting their ship's security architecture in real time. Wayland leaned toward Orion, voice low. She built all this right under our noses while we were busy mocking her. Orion didn't look away from the screen, and she knew she might be removed. That's why she gave me the device. Blackburn overheard, the words cutting deeper than either man realized. He'd been so certain of his judgment, so confident that he could spot a threat. And yet, the only reason his ship was afloat was because Astria Nix had anticipated his arrogance. He looked at the network diagram, the glowing web of reinforced defenses, the exposed record of betrayal, and understood the magnitude of her foresight. In auxiliary control, Thorne sat cuffed to a chair, his uniform rumpled, his hair damp with sweat. The room around him was filled with the silent presence of armed Marines. You really don't get it, he said to the sergeant guarding him. She's not a savior. She's a weapon the government hasn't unleashed yet. The sergeant didn't answer. He didn't need to. Orders were orders. Still, the words lingered in the air like smoke. The helicopter closed on the Leviathan, her long gray deck stretching out across the water like a runway to redemption or confrontation. Astria sat back in her seat for the first time since she'd boarded, letting her breathing slow. The mission was far from over. The breach was contained, but containment wasn't victory. She would need to finish what she started. And that meant facing Blackburn again, not for vindication, but because the work wasn't finished. The helicopter's rotors chopped the air above the Leviathan as the massive carrier loomed larger on the horizon. From a distance, its gray deck was a broad, unwavering line against the shimmering Pacific. Up close, it was alive with motion. Deck crews in colored jerseys guiding aircraft into position. Safety officers scanning for hazards, Marines standing watch at every entry point. But this time, something was different. As the helicopter made its slow approach, Astria saw the rows of sailors lining the starboard side of the flight deck. Over 5,000 personnel stood in perfect formation, their faces turned toward the arriving aircraft. It wasn't the cold curiosity of her departure. It was something closer to ceremony. She sat still in her seat, expression unreadable, as the pilot brought them in for landing. The skids touched down with a jolt. The engine wound down, the thrum of blades easing as the side door slid open. Waiting at the landing zone was Admiral Calloway Blackburn. The last time they'd stood this close, he'd been sending her off his ship like an unwelcome guest. Now his posture was just as rigid, but his expression was stripped of contempt. He raised his hand in a formal salute. It was a salute from an admiral to a civilian, something many aboard had never seen. Specialist Nix, he called over the diminishing roar of the rotors. The USS Leviathan and her crew owe you their lives. Astria stepped down from the helicopter, the Pacific wind tugging at her hair. She returned the salute with flawless military precision. I was just doing my job, Admiral. The silence broke into applause, rolling across the deck like surf. Chief Petty Officer Wayland stood among the crowd, his earlier derision gone, replaced by a nod of genuine respect. Even Ensign Orion allowed himself a small smile. Later, in the Admiral's quarters, the applause and sea air replaced by the low hum of ventilation, Blackburn poured 2 glasses of water and set one in front of her. "You were right about everything," he said. His voice carried the weight of the admission. "I let my prejudice cloud my judgment. Your credentials didn't make sense to me. Your presence seemed like an unnecessary risk. I was wrong." Astria didn't reach for the glass. "The system worked exactly as intended, Admiral, including the human element." His brow furrowed. "You predicted your own removal. I needed to. We knew there was a leak. Bait only works if the fish believes the hook is harmless. And the back doors you installed throughout my ship? Project Sentinel Protocol," she said simply. "For the past 18 months, we've been embedding fail-safes into strategic assets, naval aerospace, and civilian infrastructure. Your ship was only the latest. You're not the first commanding officer to wonder why temporary staff with unusual credentials rotate through their command." Blackburn leaned back, absorbing the scope of her words. "Who exactly are you?" "Officially, Director of Quantum Cybersecurity Initiatives for a classified task force." She touched the silver badge at her chest. "Unofficially, I find weaknesses before they can be exploited, by any means necessary." Blackburn studied her for a long moment. "What happens now?" "I finish my inspection. The real one." Over the next 12 hours, Astria moved through the Leviathan with quiet authority. In the CIC, she dissected the ship's cyber defense architecture line by line, her badge casting subtle flickers of light as it interfaced directly with terminals. Orion shadowed her when he could, learning more in hours than most cyber specialists learned in a year. "How did you know to give me that device?" she asked him once, glancing up from a cascading wall of code. "You didn't treat me like an idiot," he said simply. "I figured there had to be a reason someone with your clearance was aboard." Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Observation. Still the most undervalued skill in modern warfare. By midnight, she had uncovered 3 additional breach points, each subtle, each designed to be activated later. They weren't immediate threats, but left unchecked, they would have been devastating. Blackburn watched her from a distance during the long night. She wasn't commanding with rank or barking orders. She was commanding through competence, each keystroke an unspoken argument for why she had been sent. The crew that had once mocked her now moved aside when she approached, their conversations falling silent not out of suspicion, but respect. By dawn, the crisis was truly over. Systems were not only restored, but fortified beyond their original capacity. The Leviathan was a harder target now than it had been in years. The first light of morning spilled across the Pacific, turning the horizon into a band of molten gold. On the flight deck of the Leviathan, crew members moved with practiced efficiency, their movements brisk but quieter than usual, as if the ship itself were still catching its breath after the night before. Inside the CIC, Admiral Blackburn stood at the center console, a small black presentation box in his hands. Astria Nix faced him, her pack slung over one shoulder, her silver badge glinting softly in the low light. "The Navy Cross," Blackburn said, opening the box to reveal the medal. "Extremely rare for a civilian. But your actions saved this ship and possibly prevented a wider conflict." Astria accepted it with a slight nod, slipping the medal into her pack without ceremony. "There are others like me on every carrier in the fleet, Admiral. You just don't know it yet." Blackburn studied her. "Specialists like you? In my command." She met his eyes. The quiet ones. The overlooked ones. Embedded in places you'd never expect. "Our job is to remain invisible until the moment we're needed. Because a Guardian recognized," she tapped the badge at her neck, "is a Guardian compromised." Blackburn absorbed that, then asked, "What about Orion?" Keep an eye on him, she said. He has the right instincts. In my line of work, that's more valuable than any technical training. On the flight deck, Chief Petty Officer Wayland intercepted her as she headed for the waiting helicopter. He stood stiffly at attention. "I owe you an apology, ma'am," he said. "No, you don't, Chief," she replied. "You behaved exactly as expected. Consistency can be useful." He frowned, unsure whether she'd just insulted or complimented him. "Will we see you again?" "Not if everything goes according to plan." A faint, knowing smile touched her lips. "That's rather the point." The helicopter's turbines spooled up, the downdraft whipping at her hair and clothes. She stepped aboard without looking back, settling into the rear seat as the pilot received clearance for departure. From the bridge, Blackburn watched the aircraft lift away, the rising sun catching on its fuselage. Around him, the CIC hummed with activity, but his attention was elsewhere. In his hand was a sealed, encrypted report Astria had given him just before boarding. He opened it in private. The first paragraph was enough to hold him in place. Project Sentinel operates on the principle that the most effective defense is invisible until needed. Our specialists are embedded throughout military and civilian infrastructure, unrecognized and often underestimated until the moment of crisis. This is by design. A guardian recognized is a guardian compromised. He closed the file slowly, thinking back over his years of command, all the temporary support staff he'd ignored, the strange credentials he'd waved off, the subtle skills he'd never valued until it was almost too late. The woman he'd humiliated, escorted off his ship in disgrace, had been one of many, and he had nearly lost her before he knew what she was worth. Out over the Pacific, the helicopter angled toward the sunlit horizon. Astria sat quietly, her badge warm against her skin, her thoughts already moving to the next assignment. There would always be another breach, another infiltration, another commander who thought he knew better, until the moment he didn't. Recognition didn't matter. Gratitude didn't matter. What mattered was that the fleet was safe. She closed her eyes and let the hum of the rotors become the only sound in her world. On the Leviathan, Blackburn turned from the bridge windows and looked at his crew, really looked at them. For the first time, he wondered how many of them might be more than they appeared. How many quiet guardians were hiding in plain sight, ready to act when no one else could. The quiet ones. The overlooked ones. The ones who save you while you're too busy doubting them. He would not make the same mistake twice.